Here now exclusively, one of the attorneys representing Jose Garcia Zarateâ, Maria Belyi. Maria, thank you for joining us tonight. You want these federal charges dropped against your client. Why?
Thank you for having me, Sandra. Yes, that's correct. And in this motion, what we're asking for is discovery, essentially discovery of documents that will show how the prosecution really began, and also of collusion between the federal and the state governments.
What evidence do you have of that?
So evidence of the vindictive prosecution, what we do have is statements, first of all, from the Department of Justice spokesperson and the Attorney General of the United States immediately after the verdict that indicated that after the verdict is when the federal government began to look at seeking potential charges against our client. We also have the timing of the ultimate indictment, which happened 3 court dates after
So the timing, that's your evidence.
The timing, and also the vitriol, the rhetoric that was used by the administration and by other members of the Department of Justice about
Let's be clear on what
client.
these 2 charges are. Felon in possession of a firearm,
Sure.
and an alien illegally and unlawfully in the United States in possession of a firearm. There is overwhelming evidence to support both of those charges.
So regarding that, that's not really a consideration when considering whether or not the charge is vindictive. Even if
those are the charges that you're asking to be dismissed.
Absolutely, that's correct.
Because of political motivation. So do you somehow have proof that politics play a bigger part when prosecutors were deciding to come forth with charges against your client?
So not necessarily political motivation, but a vindictive motivation. And what that really means is that our client is actually being punished for exercising his right to go to trial. And that's what the concept of the vindictive prosecution is, that a person should not be punished for doing something that he has a right to do. So if, for example, a defendant testifies on his own behalf. He's being punished for those 2 charges,
and federal prosecutors have the right to prosecute this man to the fullest extent of the law.
So that's correct, unless that prosecution is vindictively motivated. And the Supreme Court of the United States has, not created this policy, but has spoken as to that as well. So it's not just whether or not the prosecution has a right to pursue charges. Of course, the federal government has the right to pursue charges against a person. However,
the vindictive prosecution and the reasoning behind the charges, of course, to your point, would be correct if there were not overwhelming evidence of these charges that prosecution has brought forward.
That's not true. So even if there's evidence to support these charges, which we're not saying that there is, but even if there was evidence to support those charges, the fact that they're brought forth because our client successfully exercised, he successfully exercised his right. He got this acquittal in the murder charges. He got the acquittal in the assault charges. And the anger of the administration, the anger of the Department of Justice over his being successful in that regard, in that state case, that is what brought on these charges. And I would like to point out to you that he was convicted of being a felon in possession of a firearm in state court. And the Department of Justice does have a policy to not pursue prosecutions generally that were
So
already,
it is my understanding that you're asking for these charges to be dropped. If they're not dropped, you want them to be combined, but you also want to see all the documentation that was shared between the federal and state authorities. You want that turned over to you. Is that correct?
That's correct.
It's an unbelievable case, and obviously you have seen the national outrage over the verdict in that case. We'll see where this goes. Thank you for coming on the program tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.